Hi everybody, it's Miss Burton. Today we're going to take a look at a type of mindfulness drawing technique. We're going to call this Tangle Doodles. You may know of this as Zen Tangle. I am not a certified Zen Tangle instructor. I am a credentialed California art teacher, however. I'm going to teach you this method that I've learned from books and the internet. So here are a couple examples of Tangle Doodles that I've done in the past. And today we're going to do something that's going to end up something like that. Now, you may be thinking right now, I can't do that. You may be having a conversation with yourself while you put yourself down. And I'm going to encourage you right now to stop that right this minute and take a look at the patterns that I have for you here. I have 4 patterns. I'm going to demonstrate how to do each of these. You can learn any of them. You can choose to try out some of them. You can choose to save some of them for later. But basically, here are the tools that we're going to use. We're going to start with just a regular graphite pencil. This is a number 2, also known as an HB pencil, just a basic pencil. I personally, for this purpose, might actually be using a 2B, which is just a little bit softer. Notice it doesn't have an eraser because erasing is not part of today's project. So if that just scared the heck out of you, I want you to give yourself permission today to not make mistakes. And what I mean by that isn't necessarily that things won't happen that you didn't plan, but that instead, if things happen that you don't plan, just accept them. Okay, work with them and recognize that as a human being, you are not a perfect being. No human is. So perfection is not a thing for us. We're not going to try for it. We're not going to worry when it doesn't happen. We're going to recognize right now that perfection will not happen. And part of the beauty of the art that we're going to create is the imperfection. Okay. If we were a machine, we could make machine perfect art, and it just, in my opinion, wouldn't look as good. All right. So one of the first things that I'm going to do when I'm getting ready to do my Tangle Doodles is I'm going to check my posture in my seat. And right now I have my feet flat on the floor. I'm sitting in an office chair and I'm scooted a little bit forward in it so that my feet can comfortably rest on the floor. My spine can be nice and tall. It can help to push down through your feet. That might make your spine nice and tall. And when you sit up nice and tall, I'm going to take a deep breath in. I'm going to hold it briefly, and then when I'm comfortable, I'm going to let it go. And while I'm breathing in and out, I'm going to listen for the sounds around me. If you want to close your eyes for a moment, you may. And I'm hearing the fountain outside on my patio that is splashing water. I'm hearing some traffic on the road outside my home. Earlier I was hearing birds. I'm not hearing them now. So I'm just going to notice where I am, notice my body, notice that if my shoulders are a little stiff, I'm going to try and roll them back and forth. Breathe in, relax my neck, and just kind of relax my fingers. All right. So we're going to start with this one here. Normally I would take more time than that to work on my breathing. So I encourage you to give yourself that time. So we're going to start with a pattern right here that is based on a checkerboard. So you've probably drawn a checkerboard yourself before, maybe recently, maybe not. And I'm going to have you notice that there's a little bit of a curve in this one, so we're not going to worry about straight lines. Aside from not using an eraser, something else that we're not going to use is anything to trace. We're not going to trace any circles or use a straight edge to draw perfectly straight lines, because if you'll notice mine, we're all drawn freehand, and that's part of the beauty of what we're going to be doing, okay, as I mentioned. All right. So as I analyze this pattern right here, I'm going to have you guys recognize that if you plant your wrist on your paper and you've got I have a black ink drawing pen. This is a Uniball Vision. It is waterproof and fade proof. You can use any black ink pen is what I recommend. Doesn't have to be black ink, but that's my preference, and that's generally how this is usually done. All right, so if you move your wrist this way, you're going to get a natural curve. If you want a straight line, what I like to do is pull towards myself, and I will actually lean my back backwards, kind of from my head down to my hips. So holding my back straight, I would pull a line. And if you wanted to get one horizontal, that's pretty awkward. So you can just trim your paper. All right. So since I'm going to actually enjoy the curve, and I'm going to go, yeah, just like that. So I'm going to check my breathing, check my posture, make sure that I'm relaxed. Breathe in, and I'm going to draw my line on the exhale. It tends to make it smoother. Okay, we're also not going to do sketching lines where we go and worry too much about perfection of that line. We're just going to let it be a smooth, continuous motion. So part of the process here in this type of mindfulness drawing is to have smooth movements, continual lines. All right, I'm going to decide on my distance. So right now from the top here to the top there, that's a little bit narrow. I want to go a little bit wider. So you can actually kind of practice in the air right above what you're working on. So I'm going to breathe in and then exhale. Okay, again, I'm going to check my spacing before I start drawing. I can practice in the air. If it's a little close, I can move my hand down, breathe in. And on the exhale, and I notice there's a little curvature in that line, and it's an imperfect curve, and I'm okay with it. Okay, so I'm going to just keep moving my hand back a little bit. Practice in the air, breathe in. And exhale. Okay, not rushing. And if you notice that something happens, I noticed that this time while I was drawing, my line felt like it was going a little bit further than the others. Just notice it. And then I might try and correct that on the next one. But I'm not going to worry, oh, I messed up, I need to start over. That's just not a problem. Oftentimes when we end up with a result that we didn't expect or we feel a little unhappy about, it's usually because we were in a hurry. And I can check and see if I have enough room for a little bit more. All right. With this particular type of ink, I can see that it's wet as it comes out of the pen, and I might need to wait a moment before I move my hand across it. So I'm going to decide how I want to get the angle, and do turn your paper, turn your surface. Any white paper will do. If you want to do this on a colored paper, that's not going to hurt anybody. All right, so if I want to go basically perpendicular, but it's a curve, so perpendicular is usually referred to with straight lines. So I'm just going to go across here. I'm going to breathe, check my posture. Okay, just got a little bit of a curve there. So again, check my distance. So I want to be consistent. So if I had about that much space, maybe it's about a centimeter-ish. Okay, that looks good. Breathe in. Okay, check my spacing, breathe in. I can practice in the air. And try not to hurry your breathing. If it ends up more straight or more curved, it's okay. Now, when I was getting my art degree a million years ago, I studied art at more than one university, and I noticed a difference in emphasis between process and product. And I want you to think about process on this, more about how does it feel to create the thing at the moment during the time of creation. You'll end up with a product, of course, but unless this is intended for a museum or to sell it or for a gift, then I'm going to invite you to let go of really worrying about the end product. I would also encourage you, if this is the first time you're doing something like this, don't think of this as something that you're going to give away or sell, okay, or even display. Just think of this as something for yourself. All right, so we have a basic grid or a checkerboard with a little bit of a curve in it. If you're looking for this pattern specifically on a Zentangle site or a book, they call it Knightsbridge. I'm not really sure why. They like to give these names. So what I'm going to do with each of my, I'm not going to quite call it a square, but kind of a rectangular section, is I'm going to look for the center. So we're going to eyeball it. We're not going to measure, but if it helps, you can kind of draw in the air and see if you did diagonals for the section, where would the center be? The more practice that you get, the better. Okay, and you can see here it's kind of right on the line. So if I go down here, that one might be about there. If I follow this curve down here, again, the faster that you go, the more likely you are to end up with a result that doesn't make you happy. And I'm aware that these are going to take their time to dry. Now, I am a person who likes to be a little bit random. That one's a little bit off. I'm just noticing it. In how I work from one section to another, so part of me is tempted to pull off to one side. Go ahead and do this as it feels good to you. But a big part of doing a Tangle pattern is the idea of patterning, and patterning is repetition. Okay, so I'm thinking about where would these connect. It's probably off the page. If you're left-handed and you need to work in a different direction, that's fine. And again, I'm paying attention to the fact that my ink might be wet and I don't want to drag my hand through it. So I'm just going to go down. Okay. If I go across here, it's probably right about there. Don't forget to breathe. Sometimes we get anxious that we're going to make a mistake and we hold our breath. All right, I think that one's kind of off the section as well. So what I'm going to do with these center dots that I have found is I'm going to go down to the bottom edge, straight down, and it might be helpful to just follow a section down. Breathe in, slow down if you need, or if speed is just making you kind of anxious. Our goal here is to relax and focus you and get you to be in the present moment. So I'm thinking that this dot would be up here. So I'm just going to continue down from where that would be. A little moth that seems to be drawn to the light. This would be about here. This would be about there. Okay, like I mentioned, I like to be a little bit random. And I noticed that some of them are a little bit off. When we go back and continue with our pattern, we can make some small adjustments if we're concerned about excellence. Again, we're not going to get perfection, but if we want to do our very best, that's always welcome. Oops, missed one. Okay, and I'm going to go across. So I'm just making a kind of a little square shape in the bottom corner. So this one would actually, this whole section down here would be part of that. A little moth. So at this point, I'm just going to go across, and this one's getting kind of lost there. Breathe in, check your posture. It's really easy to fall into hunching your shoulders, clenching your neck, holding your breath, clenching your fingers. If you're holding tightly to your drawing implement, just pause and notice that and try to relax. And if you need to shake it out, do so. If you need to just slow down and work with your breath. Anytime we pull attention to our breathing, it brings our attention away from distractions. It brings our attention away from worries about things that are often out of our control, or just we need to let them go for a while, even if they're in our control to any amount. It's damaging to physical and mental health to spend too much time trying to fix things, solve problems, get work done. And here in the United States, we really have a national culture of workaholism. So I invite you to take a break from that. All right, I'm going to rotate my paper, and I'm going to add one more element to this pattern. And this element is to connect the corresponding corner. So here I'm going to call this the upper left corner to the upper left corner of this kind of square section. So I'm just going to pull down from that corner to that corner. And like I said, I like to start in the middle of things for some reason. I enjoy an element of randomness. So however you need to do this is fine. The pattern is in the repeated motion. So you can think of it as your hand is doing a little dance with your paper and your drawing implement. And it takes good focus. So if you're distracted by sounds or movements or the television or people, I encourage you to find a quiet place if you can. And if you can't find an actual quiet place, you will have to try and make it in your mind. Okay. And don't forget to breathe. Sometimes I forget. So this section here, this would be coming down, and I'm just going to kind of do a quick visual. And if I discover later that I missed something, I will try to go back. All right. So we are missing the shading in black part. And I'm going to pause and make sure that my sections have dried. And you can choose how to shade this in. I like to go back and forth. You can decide how precise you want to be with your inking. You may have used a very fine tip pen, more so than the one I did, in which case you might want to use a thicker pen if you have one to do any filling in of sections, just to save yourself time. If you do that, be aware that it might be easy to go outside of the spaces that you've outlined. And if you don't like the outcome, if you don't like that effect, then just practice makes better, especially focus practice. If we practice things and we're not focused, we usually don't improve. So as you're working, don't forget to pause and check your posture. Are you breathing? Are you holding your breath? Are you hunched over? Are you clenching your drawing implement, your pen in this case? Are you pushing hard? The ink that I have in this pen just flows out of the tip of the pen just when I touch the paper, so I don't need to push on it. I often do this with fine point Sharpies or ultra fine point Sharpies with my students, and they have a tendency to shove it hard into the paper, and that's usually just going to damage the tip of the pen. The ink, if it's there, will flow out if you're allowing gravity to pull it down. Okay, I'm not, for the sake of time, I'm not going to fill in this entire pattern. You can see an example here. I'm just going to do one more row. Now, with a checkerboard pattern especially, it can be very hypnotic. So if you just want to do a checkerboard pattern for an evening, if that makes you feel good, then do what you need to do. But it can be very difficult to get someone to stop in the middle of shading a checkerboard. So just, you can notice what your tendencies are. And if you get sucked into the pull of the demands of the pattern, and if that concerns you at all, doesn't have to, you can just kind of do a little self-check-in and ask yourself, am I able to stop? If I need to stop, am I able to stop? And if not, do I just need to, is it being helpful for me to continue? So I'm just going to stop there. I want you to notice that I have 3 different values or darknesses and lightnesses in this pattern. I have white, that's just the paper itself. I have black that we've just practiced with inking. And then I have a gray section, and that's from my graphite. So I'm going to decide which section I want to shade. In this case, I've taken this trapezoid that has 2 parallel lines and 2 non-parallel lines, a 4-sided figure, and I've shaded in the ones on the top. So I might just switch it up. And just shade in, oops, I missed one. Something didn't look right. It's okay. Not the end of the world. Meow, meow, that's my kitty. Hi, Mira. Hi, baby. Okay, so I'm going to shade the trapezoids along the left hand side here. And I'm not pushing down hard. Like I said, this is a soft pencil, so I don't need to push hard. I'm just going to let the graphite rub onto the paper. Try not to clench. Notice your shoulders. Are you hunched over? Or it can be very tempting to lean over. Maybe you don't have adequate lighting. Maybe you need a better light source. Okay, that's the white of the paper. So before I shade in, now remember that we're not going to erase. So if you have a little bit of stray graphite that goes a little bit out, it's okay. Imperfection in art is often what we really like about it. It tells us that a human made it, and it can be actually really pleasing to see. Obviously, if it's not just sloppiness. So we certainly want to check our focus if we're getting results that we're not happy with. A couple of possibilities. One, you need to practice more to get better. Practice makes better, not perfect. Not going to be perfect. We can get better. We can get excellent. We can become very excellent with our skills through practice and focus. But if we're worried about perfection, if we're comparing ourselves to others, if we're comparing our work to something that a machine might have done, then that can just be harmful and give you permission to just let that go. So basically that's how to do this pattern. And what my brain does when I'm looking at this is it looks very three-dimensional to me. Let me check the focus there. All right. So I could continue filling in that pattern, but you get the basic idea. Okay, so let's go to the next one. So this next section is when we think about light and dark, our value, it has a lot of black ink in it. We have a little bit of white showing through from the paper, but not a ton. But the basic pattern here are circles of varying sizes. So we're going to go down to the section underneath. And I'm going to check my posture. I keep doing this because it's really easy to slip out of good posture. It's really easy to clench. It's really easy to hold your breath. And it's really easy to feel anxiety. So this is the opposite of our goal here. So I'm going to just check my posture and I'm going to breathe. And in order to get a good circle, this is a small movement. So it starts in the wrist here, but it kind of comes through the fingertips. So if your circles are more oval than circular, practice really does get better. I'm just noticing that it's a little flat on top, and I'm going to be okay with that. So I drew a circle, didn't quite touch the top edge. I'm going to squeeze a little circle into the space that's between those. And so what I'm going to do at this point is I'm just going to work my way across this little rectangular section that I have, and I'm going to create circles through the same repeated movement. That's the patterning. And I'm just going to kind of try and fill in the spaces that emerge or show up as I'm working. And I'm going to recognize that they're going to be different sizes. If I go a little bit over an edge of this space, that's okay. What's important here is that you are practicing and improving your circles. And try to relax your fingers on your pen and make sure that you're breathing and not holding your breath. And remember, this is not for sale. This is not for display necessarily. You might end up with a product that you're really happy with and you want to share it, and there's nothing wrong with that. But I don't want you to hold that as a goal, because then your goal will not be your mindfulness or your relaxation. And we want to just let ourselves relax. As we see imperfection with each next circle that emerges, we'll just notice the imperfection, and we will try to avoid bullying ourselves. It can be really tempting. We can have this as a really unfortunate habit where we are the meanest person to ourselves, and we put ourselves down, and that usually comes from having heard someone else do it. So you probably didn't like it at the time if someone did that to you and you learned it from that. And we don't have to keep doing that to ourselves. We are in control over how we speak to ourselves. Okay, or we can work towards it. Okay, so notice that I'm getting circles of different sizes. Now, just like with any pattern, you can get into the groove of making the pattern. Generally, you want to avoid talking, and as I'm giving instruction, I'm talking, so not ideal. But as you're getting into the groove of the pattern, again, notice your posture. Notice if you're starting to squeeze your pen, breathe. You can let go of it, shake out your fingers a little bit. Check your spine. Are you hunching over? Are your shoulders tightening up? But just see if you're getting into a groove of making a pattern where it's starting to relax you. And I'm feeling that pull of the pattern that wants me to fill in this whole section. And I'm going to try to not do that. So I think I'm just going to fill in over to here. And then I might go in and add some little circles in the in-between spaces if I can fit one. If it's not enough space, then I'm not going to worry about it. All right, so I have a collection of circles, and the pattern is the same all the way down. So this one up here took me a very long time today, and I don't want to repeat that process. All right, so I've started out with circles, which is this repeated movement in my hand. And I'm going to switch now to straight lines. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to find a point on the edge of my circle, and I'm going to pull a straight line to the other side. Now, normally I wouldn't pick up my pen, but I wanted you to be able to see this. So normally I would just continue into a square, as close as I can to a square or a rectangle. And I notice it's imperfect, and I recognize that it's imperfect. And instead of telling myself that I'm a bad artist, that I don't have skill, that I shouldn't be doing this, I just notice it and think about that if I want to create that shape again and not have that result, how I might do that. So notice that I repeated the circle inside. So the pattern here is circle, square, circle on the outside, square on the inside, then followed by another circle. And if you have room, you can do another square. I'm going to try and have the corners touch, and if they don't, it's okay. If there's room, you can add another circle. Okay, I'm going to go on to the next one, and notice I pull down straight this way, so I might change my angle a little bit just to change it up. So notice that was a continuous line, and then a continuous line for the circle. And if there's room to squeeze in a little square, go for it. Now these ones over here are a little bit small. This one I can do a square and maybe a small circle. These ones here I'm just going to leave. Okay, don't feel like you have to get every single one if they're on the small side. If the sides of your inner square get a little curved, that's okay. I didn't quite touch the edge. We'll just try next time. Okay, it still looks beautiful in my opinion. So it's just that repetition. And I promise you, focus practice will improve your skills. People like to use the word talent when they talk about an artist. Now you may have forgotten, but you were born an artist. When you were little, someone probably, hopefully, put some crayons in your hand, or a pencil in your hand, or a paintbrush in your hand, or gave you finger paints to play with, or you just made art out of your food, even if your parents didn't appreciate it, or your caregivers. But we are born expressive beings, and it's in our nature to explore two-dimensional and three-dimensional, even four-dimensional art media. But it's when we start to listen to bullies, whether it's our own voice or someone else's, who try to convince us that we're not artistic, that we start to believe it. And for a lot of people, this happens around age 10 or 12, where we just give up on creating art because we are comparing ourselves to others who maybe have a skill level that we don't quite have. And I will tell you, skill comes from focus practice. The idea of talent, most teachers in any of the arts forms are going to take issue with that term, because that tends to make it seem like a person who's really good at something, they just, came out of their mom's womb that way. And on the face of that, if you think about it, that's ridiculous. Infants can't do this. You need to be able to hold a drawing implement. You need to be able to focus. Now, not everyone has the same natural abilities or ease in different things. Some of us find it really easy to run fast, but maybe we have long legs. Maybe we have a lot of muscles. Maybe we have some genes that we inherited that help us with that. So same thing can happen in just a person's visual, kind of their visual inner eye. But you can also certainly teach yourself skills that do not come easy. All right, so there's my basic pattern. Now for me personally, this tends to look like little rosebuds that are tightly coiled, but it's just circles and squares. I want to do one. All right, so there's that pattern. Now this pattern I'm not going to add graphite to. You can if you want. I like to leave it as is because there's already a lot of ink on there. All right, the next pattern, this is more of an organic shape. Organic shapes are shapes that are found in nature, and this pattern is just meant to fill the space that you have. In a Tangle doodle, usually the spaces are not rectangular. Usually there's not a lot of straight lines. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to break up this space into a couple of different shapes, and I'm going to try out this pattern twice. Okay, so the pattern isn't meant to be taken into a rectangular space and then filled in twice, but it's meant to fill the space that you're given. Okay, and that'll make more sense in a moment. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to kind of rotate this space around and think about what would be the most natural way for me to create this pattern in this space. And I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to work around a central line that curves up like this, but I'm not going to draw that line out first. So I'm just going to show you what I'm going to do. So just double check my posture, breathe, and go. So notice that I do a curve and I come back, and I do another curve the opposite direction. I'm going to go down that middle section there and curve and come back. And I'm going to try and keep one continual line as long as I can. And if I go over the edges of my space a little bit, that's okay. And I'm just kind of trying to retrace, but it's basically kind of a teardrop shape. It's just kind of bending to fill the space. And as I overlap, I'm trying not to lift up the tip of my pen. And I'm being very kind and compassionate and forgiving of myself when my lines overlap instead of just retrace each other. Okay, I'm going to pick up my pen just because I need to move my hand up. But I'm going to try and start where I stopped. So the idea here is one continual line, and it's just this dance. If I don't get into the exact corners of my space, it's okay. And breathe. Okay, and good enough. Okay. Now in your Tangle Doodle, this line here would be graphite, and so it wouldn't be as strong, it wouldn't be as harsh. So I filled in my space with this repeating pattern. And for me, I like to go in and add some more details. You don't have to, but if you like the details, this is just created with the flick of the wrist. Going this way is super, super awkward. It might help if I zoom out a little bit there. So if I'm trying to go back this way and that's awkward, I'm just going to rotate my paper. So I want to work with the natural bend of my wrist or flick of my wrist. So I'm just going to go down from kind of that point of that teardrop shape. And I'm just kind of quickly pulling out a couple little wispy lines. For me, this pattern tends to look like a leafy plant, but it's just an organic shape made out of one continuous line with kind of teardrop shapes that curve around. So like I mentioned, if I want to go the opposite direction, I want to make life as easy for myself as I can. Life is difficult enough. There's no need to give ourselves extra challenges, and we all probably do this. So I invite you to not think of yourself as being lazy, but think of yourself as being smart. Why don't we do things to make life easier? Now, if you like the little dots on the outside, it's just more patterning. Again, patterning is just repetition. Okay, so I am just going to kind of come around the curve, and if there's not space there, then I won't. And then just add a few little dots. Try not to hurry it too much. And breathe. Add as many as feels natural if you like them. Just kind of following that curve until I bump into the next one, or whatever makes me happy. Okay, I'm being aware that my ink that I have just placed might still be wet, and I don't want to smudge it. Okay, so I'm going for some variety in my patterns, variety in types of shapes. Now, if you look at this one up above here and it feels a little bit three-dimensional to you, that's because of graphite shading. Now, I have these two spaces because I could flip this and do another one. In fact, I think what I will do is I'll do that without talking. All right, so as I mentioned, shading with graphite, pretty simple on this pattern. I'm just going to go down the center where I have these little kind of hairy lines, and I'm just going to kind of quickly lay down some graphite. I'm not pushing too hard, and it helps to have a slightly dull pencil because you're going to get more graphite on there quicker. And I'm just going to go in with my fingertip and kind of blend that out. Okay, and you can it gives a feeling of darkness there coming out to light, so it feels like it's going from something that's further away to something that's closer. That's just what happens with our brain when we see something that's darker, is it can often give the illusion that it's farther away. Something closer can often give the illusion, something lighter can give the illusion that it's closer. I'm just laying down some graphite kind of quick. Now, if you have a blending stump that's rolled up paper that has a pointy tip on it that you can use to grab the graphite and move it around, those work great for something like this. And you can see with this pattern here, that's now upside down, that I went around the outside and did kind of a shadow around the outside. So if you like that effect, I'm just kind of tracing around. Again, it works best with a dull pencil, slightly dull. Okay, and I'm just doing an echo, and I'm not going to do the whole thing, but you can blend it out a little if you like. And it'll give the feeling that, again, it's standing out more, it's coming out from the paper, and you've got a little shadow under there. All right, so we've already done 3 out of 4 patterns. And this last one I saved for last for a reason. This one is made out of what are meant to be straight lines. And I believe that in the Zentangle sites, they refer to this as Rick's paradox. I could have that not quite right, but something like that. So in this case, we're starting with a rectangular shape. In the tangle that I did before this, I used more of a triangular shape. So just recognize that it can be adapted for a rectangular shape or a triangular shape or something that's close to that. All right. So what I'm going to do is I want to get straight lines. And I mentioned before that if I want a line that doesn't curve, my wrist wants to curve. If I'm going even across, it's really hard not to get a curve. So what I find easiest is to pull back, and I'm using my whole spine when I do that. So I'm going to turn this slightly at an angle because I want a line that's going to come down like this. So I'm going to decide how much distance I want to give there, maybe a ½ centimeter, maybe a little more. I'm going to breathe, and I'm going to pull a line from about that far out down to this corner, and it can be really helpful to just practice that in the air. And I notice that I'm curving and I'm going over here. So I want to go from here to there. So I'm just going to breathe and practice in the air. Okay, and perfection is not a thing, so I'm going to forgive myself ahead of time. Breathe in. And turned out pretty good. I'm happy with myself. So I'm going to allow that to dry as I rotate this. And same thing, I'm going to have it a little bit off to the side. And as far as I went in that space, I want to go about the same. So I'm going to take time to do just a quick measurement with my eye and a practice. So I'm going to go from there to there. And it really helps to pull from the back. So the more you practice, the straighter it'll get. But if you're depending on going this type of movement, you're probably going to get a curve. All right, I'm going to check my spacing. I'm going to practice it. I'm going to breathe. Okay, every time I really work with my breath, I'm more pleased with my results. And maybe I can zoom this in just a little bit. All right, breathe in from here to here. All right, so now I've got a complete set, and it's kind of an offset rectangle. And so now I've got this space here. So notice I have a second line. Before I was working off this edge line. Now I'm working on this slightly more diagonal or skew line. So same approximate spacing. And this time, instead of going to this bottom corner, I'm going to this new corner. So breathe in. And turn it about 90 degrees. And check your spacing. Make sure that's dry. From here to here. So your lines are going to start getting shorter. And so eventually you're going to go faster and faster, but I encourage you not to just floor it and go super fast, because that makes it the most likely that you're going to be unhappy with your result. Okay, shorter lines tend to go faster. Check my spacing from here to here. That was a little bit narrow. It's not the end of the world, but next time I do want to try to be more careful about consistent spacing. Helps if you can see it. So each time I'm rotating, if you get distracted on this one, it's easy to forget where you stopped. So really try to hold your focus. Really try to limit distractions around you if you can. Okay. And if your lines end up a little bit curved, not the end of the world. Okay, or if they kind of bend out a little bit sometimes, again, not the end of the world. Just on your next one, think about how that happened and try to think about how you can avoid it. Okay. Spacing. And that one went super curvy, and it's okay. I'll just try not to do that on my next one. See? And I focus on what I need to do to make that more correct. It usually happens. Okay, So this one I have kind of a curved line, so I'm going to bring this out just a little bit more. And it bumped into that line a little bit, and it's okay. I know it's a little crooked, and I forgive myself. And that one didn't exactly come to a point. And again, try to improve on my next one, and it's okay. See? Practice makes better. But it's that focus practice where we reflect on what's going the way we had hoped and what kind of got away from us. And you know what? A lot of life is out of our control. Sometimes even our physical movements. And if we're trying to control everything, we're going to be disappointed for sure. So we don't want to set ourselves up for disappointment. We want to recognize that we have some control, but we are not on this planet alone. And if we can feel alone, we are constantly surrounded by so many other beings and living things, non-living elements. If you believe in a supernatural, then maybe that's there. I don't know. I'm not here to judge your ideas. Just please don't inject bleach in your veins, and we're all good. Shouldn't have to say that. Okay. So you can start to see that we have the feeling of a curve all around here, but it's made up of straightish lines. And if you really prefer to do something like this with a straight edge, you may do that. Just recognize that it's not really the intent of Zen Tangle or Tangle Doodles, which is a mindfulness technique. And if you're worried about perfection, then you're going to end up with a very different process. Since we're focused on process more than product today. Certainly valid in art to do things with drafting tools if you like to do that, or with a computer. It's just not this project, that's all. Okay, as we start to get closer to the center, the shape and the space that we have is going to kind of change and feel. So if I'm trying for the same basic spacing that I've had all along, pretty quickly here I'm going to run out of space. And I kind of like to go until I have just a triangle in the inside. Okay. And so there's that space. I'm going to give it a moment to dry. And I can, that's zooming in, zoom out. And see how that turned out compared to the one above. Pretty good. Okay, and last thing I'm going to do here is I'm going to think about how I could add some shading. So if you look at this one, what I did is I looked to see where the lines came together the closest. And when you have lines coming closer together, it's going to appear darker. So I'm just going to kind of follow that curve, and I can fade out with just less pressure as I pull away from that. And I can also use my finger to blend that out. So rotate, repeat. These lines are closer together. I'm just kind of fanning out some graphite, fading it out, and then blend it out with my fingertip. And it can just give an interesting feeling, or it might give you a feeling of 3 dimensions, which can be fun. Okay, and one more. Don't forget to keep breathing. All right. Okay. So at this point, we've got our patterns. Like I said, I didn't fill this one in. I didn't shade that one in, but you get the general idea.